Hello everybody, it's the monthly movie roundup for July. Let's go. Kinds of Kindness by Yorgos Lanthimos. I made a full review of this. I recommend you check it out. It was a lot of fun to make. It's a fun, weird, miserable movie. Lanthimos on Lanthimos mode. Pearl. Ty West. Okay, I finally watched this, thanks to MaXXXine coming out this month. Not too long ago, it was me finally watching X, so I could watch Pearl, and getting surprised by just how much I liked it. And even though my expectations for Pearl were higher than for X, it still surpassed them. The number one reason is Mia Goth. She proves why she's a modern-day horror queen. Pearl losing it is cinema itself. Not even just her losing it, you can see her building up to losing it, and get to brace yourself for the sheer volume of her emotional dam bursting. It's never one note either. Like, each big moment she's doing something new, rising to meet what will keep it shocking. Pearl's face is probably the goriest thing you could see in theaters these days. It's about at a Terrifier 2's level. Ty West, so far in the X trilogy, actually follows through on the heart in each of these stories. It's what I like the most about them. X dwelled on the acrid sting of regret and mortality by lingering longer on the elderly monsters of its old exploitation homage. So I found it more in line with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or an Oni Baba than, like, The Granny Killer 2. It's kitsch and camp that goes from comical to haunting to deeply disturbing the longer you look at it. And Pearl captures the beginnings of that. The festering teenage angst, the take me away from here longing of youth being wasted, to its boiling point, bursting into a suspended, bloody tantrum. Like, after the turning point, the movie is just relentlessly unhinged and tense. And then the credits act as one final cherry on top. A lurid and cruelly funny living snapshot of death and life, or a joke depending on which side of the curtain you're on. It's perfect. It's the one moment where you can see the vision of the X trilogy, with all of its jumping time periods and dwelling on age, also filtered through the art of cinema. It's a dimension short of the Lynch films it's taking from, absolutely. But by retreating to the genre film as its primary lane, it doesn't have to be so deep. They have fun and just enough meat on them to matter. A strong 8. The New York Ripper, Lucio Fulci. So yeah, I'm preparing to see MaXXXine and what falls upon my streaming lap, but the movie whose title is shorthand for exactly the 80s giallo slasher vibe it's teasing. And there's a lot of good moments in this. The sleazy set pieces, classic giallo lighting suddenly appearing for stalking and slashing setups, that odd dichotomy of photographically artsy and tonally trashy. But there's also plenty of bad. The movie's quality line would look like this. The killer talks like a duck and quacks like a duck, which leads to scenes as goofy as you'd imagine. But somehow, goddammit, other times they do make it creepy. I mean, how perverse is that to do while murdering someone? The score had a thrown-on quality, like this news channel-ass music will be playing at moments where it does not gel with the tone at all. This, and a lot of mandated, boring investigator scenes, add up to too much filler for this to be a favorite. Like, they really gotta force making everyone seem like the killer. For what? Like, in the end, it does not matter at all. Passably entertaining. 7 films by Suzan Pitt. We're gonna get into some meat here. As an experimental Dream Logic film fanatic, I am way overdue for seeing Suzan Pitt's famous short films. Individually, I really want to talk about some of these. First is Crocus. It's about sex, the sexual part of the self, and it being activated in a distracting environment. So many distorted rooms, distorted reality. It gets you to know the basic ingredients of a Pitt film. Jefferson Circus Songs is a fall harvest festival variety theater show in your rustic town, with a bit of traveling performer and circus in there. The feeling is growing now that we're inside her cranium and seeing a direct visualization of thoughts, creations of light and sound in the dark jungle of her mind. And all the figures dance and bend and shake around as chaotically as raw imagination. I always imagine the people who make experimental films that look like this grew up in vine-wrapped Victorian houses in the middle of the woods, running outside to Alice in Wonderland-like locations, being read Grimm's fairy tales at bedtime. I will say it's easy to get distracted during these, It's like there's a moth flapping its wings really close up against the camera. It's hard to pay fully unbroken attention, but they're short shorts and can be watched multiple times if you want to absorb them more fully. And distracting doesn't necessarily mean boring. Like I'm awed by the strange, dense dance of this piece. Asparagus. The profane played with his beauty. The dissonant soundscape really captures being in a dream here. Trapped in a total uncertainty, like walking in a place that's fantasized but dangerous for some unseen reason. It's also a work of frames and framing. In terms of dreaminess, it's hyper-reflexive, like playing with a tiny doll of yourself in your dollhouse, being the observer and the observed at the same time, which is an apt analysis of dream logic. We feel like we're us in our dreams, while what happens, which feels totally out of our control, is also us, or our minds doing. Then it leaves, and shifts to more literal commentary on interior space versus the outside world. Let me do my part and throw in my full pretentious personal interpretation here for Asparagus. The key to it for me was the preciousness of things that are ours, the world in a spiritual sense. Do objects change once the person they belong to dies? Like how once left behind, things that held sentimental values and qualities in some way lose something by becoming plain objects again. Because there's that aura infused into things, and even people, as if through some invisible prism given from subjectivity, a consciousness expressing itself into the world outside of it. That is the thing that Asparagus is made of. I mean, at once it's not real through a purely objective lens, but it's real enough that it can be understood what I'm talking about here, and real enough to be conveyed through art, this feat that allows us organisms some objectivization of these abstract, incorporeal parts of our conscious living. We hope deep in our souls for our soul to be real, be able to share it with beings outside of our bound consciousness, and more, have it be understood. All human cultures have references to supernatural phenomena, apparitions, afterlives, the presence of a person in rooms bereft of them, as a part of our processing of existence and mortality. And something of this morbidness, this hauntology, is hiding in Pitt's animated world. I'm literally waggling my fingers like David Lynch as I'm trying to explain these ideas. We also always turn to sex to satisfy or obliterate these feelings. Asparagus has plenty of sexual innuendo going on around its headiness. Joy Street. So Pitt is just responsible for the entire creepy toon aesthetic, huh? From those 90s era cartoon styles of oddly grotesque to your bendy, creep wave animations for Gen Alphas. It's like that Tom and Jerry clip where they sit on the tracks and wait for a train to kill them. You know, with the crackle filter, maybe a distorted phonograph music over it. But it's the best this aesthetic could be, because more importantly, it's its own thing. This was so well crafted in both its tonal poles. All the facets of our animation are telling these stories of despair and humor, of modern loneliness versus an orgy of nature and life. I also get that Freudian sexual component, once again. I enjoy how Pitt's cerebral surrealism shies nothing away from the female psyche. There's a ferocious seeking of the masculine, with this thing's energies, and the literal interplay with an art style outside of her own. On first watch, I was totally blown away. El Doctor, I talked about her work leading up to a crude cartoonist and comic strip style, but now we're here, in the 90s, and it's just less interesting. The animation is much flatter. I kinda got distracted by how much I wanted to see the names on the credits, because I was guessing this isn't like a true Pitt film, as much as those earlier ones. I was thinking maybe Bill Plimpton would show up by chance. The setting of Mexico seemed random. It followed a tone based around Mexican cultural views on death, I suppose, but this could have been a lot more interesting. And I would expect Pitt to explore this theme way more passionately. And before I move on, let's talk about the voice acting. First off, in this one people speak and have dialogue. I couldn't tell if it was meant to be so garbled that words hardly mattered, but I learned they just used non-actors in voice roles, and man did it get rough. There's some fun patience and absurd visuals for sure, it just lacks too much. Then we got two really short ones. Visitation is a moody, dusky, chalky netherworld, a monochromatic, flame-lit reverie of sorrows, histories of atrocities, a lost race, with a fair shake of phantasmagoria, all with sad violin playing. It's brisk and indefinable, but a good one. It's like a poem, which makes sense, I guess, since it's narrated with a poem. And then lastly, Pinball. It's Pitt meets Stan Brakhage, basically. This is based on her paintings and their distinct style, and the reactions between them when slamming together at a smiling friend's pace. But it's nothing new in experimental film. I guess it's just cool to see more of her painterly works. So yeah, Circus Songs, Asparagus, and Joy Street are legitimate masterworks. Visitation and Crocus are brief, but worth adding if you want more. El Doctor kinda holds it back overall, and Pinball is a curio. Tenebre, Dario Argento. Now, I don't know how highly this is ranked critically in the Giallo canon, but I do know it by name and the poster. And for me, it was good, with Dario Argento's vogue visual styles being spectacular highlights. But ranked with all the Giallos I've seen, it was just an okay one. I like the excessive artificiality of the genre. In a comforting sense, in terms of the play involved, the fun of filmmaking, and just designing these choreographed numbers, with the camp of it servicing stark morbid dramas like serial killings. We're also repeating the theme of degeneracy in society. Perversions of all trades are woven into the mise-en-scène and tied to the acts of killing by association or effect. But there's a line this was crossing where it comes off as too proud of itself, even cocky, with this whole meta author and a plot about a killer copying their works. I can swear it's been done by 1982. Also, the constant red herring is the fake-outs of who the killer could be. Not as clever as the movie strongly feels it must be. It's dumb fun, and it works as dumb fun. I mean, by the last twists, I was getting a laugh out of just how far they were taking it. I just didn't think it was that special. Nowhere. Yeah, I rewatched Nowhere. Yeah, it's still a 10. I'll throw in one more angle to it that I appreciate. You know, I watched this time with headphones, and one thing that distinguishes Araki from other directors is his use of music. Not score, but placement of shoegaze, punk, alternative tracks that you know mean a lot to him. And as with the vapid hormonal cry that is Nowhere, he shamelessly allows songs to take over the emotion of a scene, something that's traditionally frowned upon in filmmaking. But his commitment and authenticity proves it can work. Especially with the material, the era, the dreamlike youth he's exploring, a state of mind where music is something to be absorbed by, to fall into. Like Nowhere, like Youth, music doesn't have an answer. It carries the feeling. MaXXXine. I wrote an entire review for this video. I was getting it ready to make, but some life stuff happened, so same reason I'm rushing through these. Let me cut my thoughts down to its skeleton. I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen, guys. My expectations are higher now, and this is the weakest in the trilogy. X and Pearl surprised me with how much West could hold on to an emotion at the core of all the pastiche. But by the end of MaXXXine, I had nothing to go on. No clue what emotion this new rebirthed MaXXXine was supposed to give me. It's swallowed by the pastiche, the references, the shallow fanboyisms, which were the most discardable parts of the other two. I think West finally came too close to the sun here. Meaning this era is the one he comes off as most obsessed with. And so he tries way too hard to shove our faces into the 80s. A feeling that's especially tired at this point, after so much 80s nostalgia. I mean, its main theme has been done before at histrionic heights by some of the greatest filmmakers in history. It's incredibly overdone and requires a new take to be on an extremely high standard. Mulholland Drive is David Lynch showing he can convey that weight. MaXXXine makes it feel cheap. And the promotion of the meta layer to the forefront is a smart choice, in theory, for the resolution to this three-story arc across cinema in the 20th century. It doesn't connect the three films together, though, and it's far too carried away with eulogizing the 80s and classic Hollywood in a bizarrely simpering, pandering way for a trilogy that's been a subversion of the system and Hollywood's effect on people, especially women. We'll start with the style first, as that is how West clearly approached the film. I am very careful not to use the style over substance phrase flippantly. Often it's a cop-out for not engaging with the audiovisual medium properly. But it applies to specific films like MaXXXine, where it feels as though there was a limited time frame given. West spent 80% of that time building the style, then ran out of time while working on the script. And the ongoing montage of the film's sequence winds up ironically feeling slow. He's looking up to De Palma, but maybe he should be looking at newer blood like Bertrand Bonello. His films are considered having the Lynchian and meta qualities, but he has his own way of creating scenes that work simultaneously as surface and allegory, heightened by a knowledge of film history. His The Beast is out, and I'm just dying to watch it. West is just so one-dimensional with it. The references are obvious, and he fails to go for more creative ways to convey the timelines and movie histories overlapping. It's like the Disney Great Movie Ride. You know, the one that was put out of commission? Like, this is the one selling out for Hollywood's attention. You know, the industry that still famously ignores the greatest performances of the year when they're from horror movies. They're not gonna start answering your calls, Ty West, I'm sorry. Mia Goth isn't acknowledged yet, even after Pearl, and this film doesn't give her nearly as much shine. But hey, at least when it comes to what we're here for, the kills, West knows what he's doing. The blood is that popping red paint kind, and the more grossly realistic and brutal in other scenes where it needs it. Still, just one thing. The most memorable, cover your eyes bit of violence is at the beginning. Like, rookie move to have your first gore scene be the peak. As an audience, we expect that to be your hint of things to come. Like, goddamn, they really went there. If that's the first thing we see, things are gonna get real nasty, aren't they? Can't wait. And then nothing that bad happens for the rest of the movie? Like, okay. And the character, the story, MaXXXine. I felt less connected to MaXXXine at the close of this movie than I did at the start. Everything that was added on to her backstory felt like it detracted from the character, being an expositional string of plot elements dumped onto her, removing her agency and individual motivations. All the people she knows are so underdeveloped, they say nothing about her. Now, there were a few big moments that felt like we were getting the MaXXXine treatment. A lot of the very beginning scenes, we get her audition, which is all great. Another scene, what happens after she puts the car keys in her fist, was amazing. And a dream sequence near the end. So I knew who the Ripper was on their first appearance, and if it's supposed to be that obvious, why? The whole Giallo setup is in service of a whodunit, and you had all of these secondary characters and unseen Hollywood machinations that could have been written to add that crazy ambiguity and paranoia, and motivate MaXXXine to have to take matters into her own hands, because even those mentors or the two cops following her could be in on it, since we all know the shadowy Hollywood conspiracy archetype. It's a postmodern horror, very feminist, the 80s horror film world, but populated with women. And it's a post-Me Too horror. MaXXXine has to take on a heroic role. She saves the next girl, literally, but also metaphorically. An industry pushing forward having conquered its patriarchal roots. Literally. And what I hate is that I do not feel that with the closing image that we leave MaXXXine's story with. I give MaXXXine a 6 out of 10. As I write the review and go back over everything, it's gotten real close to dropping to a 5, but I'll leave it alone for now. It's fun enough when you're watching it, you know? Dr. Caligari. This is 100% art school kid shit. With, for some reason, the Mexican restaurant / Spanish language textbook graphic design. You know, at the start I was getting a bit of Son of the Mask, a bit of Giallo directed like silent film, a smidge of Suzan Pitt, and a bit more of a smidge of Ulrich Oettinger. And if this all sounds excessive, it is. Like a creamsicle melted into root beer. Maybe you like both of these things, but it doesn't create a greater new thing. But you know, maybe it was more about the childish experimentation, the dumb shit you try with your friends around. And it's so stupid, I kinda love it. It works in large thanks to being contained to an asylum. The stupid, purely absurd, never-ending music video-ness of it eventually plants itself into your brain. You could put this pretty straightforwardly in the asylum horror genre, which in much more normal cases sees a regular protagonist being institutionalized, ironically made crazy by the horrific conditions and imprisonment of the madhouse, yada yada. You know, except this one's poking at you. For Dr. Caligari, which is weird for the sake of being weird, it fits. And you can't say they're lazy. What really saves the feature length of the film is how much sustained effort is put into these crazy setups and pop glossolalia dialogue. I mean, some of these effects are really good, like ew. They're gross. And the choreography is like, some experimental directors get the precise tempos and smoothness and all the other factors of movement. The director and some of the actors and Dr. Caligari doesn't quite have the chops of that. But over time, you kind of warm up to its art, filmy posing, the sort of awkwardness of it. I know others feel pretentiousness oozing off of this stuff, but I see it as an innocence. The unabashedness of a child sharing all of their favorite things. It's babbling and overenthusiastic to a vaguely aggressive degree, but it's also kind of sweet. Kinda. I'm just happy that they're so happy about something. The People's Joker. I saw this at a theatrical screening, which for this film's sake, thank God I did. It was with an audience clearly full of its target niche, and the absurdity of seeing something this shitposty in such a public environment is the meta layer of humor that kept my amusement afloat. To be honest, I didn't love the movie. If I had seen it at home, probably might not have finished it. Thing is, I don't really know how the hell to evaluate or even classify it. Like, I really can't give a rational thought to what the experience of it was, besides some basic things like, Vera isn't really funny. I'm sorry. And the visuals are shitty, but also shittier than they should be, like if care was placed into it. What I'm wondering is if I can just see this as a documentary-like personal autobiography from its creator, with all the post-content DC comic copywriting layer as a meaningless sheen of shit ending at context to this trans experience in this terminally online generation. Because within all the plot is a very straightforward, literal trauma dump and reckoning for Vera, echoing unadorned experiences and feelings from childhood to now. And believe me, this is vocal trans-cultural politics. The shout it trans style. No holds barred allowed for anybody who'd want to ignore this fact. I just don't get on board with how much the People's Joker champions sympathy for a group that's caused so much harm to our children and society. Stand-up comedians. Thank you. I mean, that's about how funny the movie is the entire time. But, whatever. That stuff was genuinely insightful and emotional. So does it fall into the camp of films like Orlando, My Political Biography, where there's an intertextual surface to what's really an anthropological pseudo-documentary? Just, from heaps of trash instead of high art. Or is it a comedy putting its middle finger up the comic book establishment industrial complex for us to find humorous? On that end, it really isn't well-done comedy. And yes, I mean even as anti-comedy. The Channel Awesome comparisons are exactly what I said to myself very early on. Now, there is this totally separate wedding scene as an introduction, which honestly was the best part in the movie. I mean, maybe we'll see better from Vera going on, especially with some residuals from this film's moderate success. You're just too green right now, Vera. You're too green. Even if you explicitly convey that with the meta story. I don't go watch beginner stand-up comedy, girl. I don't love the game like that. Compliment part of the sandwich, you actually captured the feeling of a startup comedian crew, like the behind the scenes, really well. There's a charisma to the collective. Penguin comes off as a funny guy. But on stage, too green. A generous 5 out of 10. Oh, and we round it out with 2 masterpieces. First, Dazed and Confused. Dazed and Confused. Yeah, this would be hard to describe with few words if I hadn't just seen another movie. It's nowhere for the 70s. It's nowhere for the 70s. Even though really nowhere is Dazed and Confused for the 90s, but whatever. And I have to check out American Graffiti now because that's what this keeps getting called a version of. But this subset of films, they are foremost like a cinematic ode and elegy to youth. Dazed and Confused carries you through with both a sense of objectivity and subjectivity, though what's true to reality versus nostalgia is up in the air. Every single scene and interaction feels lovingly crafted to perfectly encapsulate a facet of being there in that time and place. You feel like all of the people at the same time in this film, all of the age groups. It's like when you realize all those times you lied or covered something up to your parents. Of course they knew everything, but there's a running permittivity, the enhanced boys will be boys culture, which is partially universal, but felt much stronger in those days. And sequences like the famous paddling scene are surprisingly layered when you see it in the movie, because you're experiencing the scene from both sides simultaneously. It feels like you're seeing the whole cycle of behaviors and how that affects the next generation. The loose, unobtrusive eye of the film lends it so much significance by acting like there is none. And the thing is, I'm 27, and boy is that number given significance for a reason. You know, after the vague, still young feeling 20s, I do concur this is the year where it really feels like you've crossed over into the adult age bracket. Like, I couldn't just hang out with young adults anymore without feeling like a weirdo. You know, I'm no Wooderson. And here I am finding all these classic films about what youth is, what it was, how it goes by, and like, damn, are they all hitting really close to home for me. There's not much for me to go over. It's just an experience, and you should go on it. All I can say is it never faltered. It's always stunningly presented and performed by its now star-studded cast of then young nobodies. It's something that managed to hook onto pop culture despite being entirely authentic and independent. We're closing things off with Bringing Out the Dead, the Nick Cage Scorsese movie. Holy shit, I did not expect this film to keep hitting me. This is like the perfect Scorsese film for me. I went in knowing that it was underrated, but this is now my favorite Scorsese movie. Granted, I'm still one day going to watch all of the classic gangster ones, but first off, this is a Nick Cage movie, which would already have me jumping in. But the cast list just kept getting more and more stacked. Like in the opening, when all those names showed up, I was hooked. Patricia Arquette, she fits so well into this 90s era, I don't know, horror, dark world. I'm rewatching The Wire, and when all these actors from The Wire were showing up, I was just like, god damn, is there anybody in this movie I don't know? Okay, all I'm gonna say is this is the exact vibe that I like to collect, that I like to study. It was this 90s, maybe early 2000s era, grime chic, this modern vampire calling card, you know? You see it developing with Jacob's Ladder, Doom Generation, Lost Highway, Vampires the Masquerade, Chris Cunningham videos, fucking 9 Inch Nails, and Marilyn Manson was like a pop star. You know, everything that was sort of dumped into Silent Hill, that whole Silent Hill vibe that was an amalgamation of this shit. This purgatorial horror, combined with the Scorsese Schrader tone, which comes across fully even through this collaboration with a era and vibe. I just felt like this film was being right on the precipice of hell, constantly being pulled in, feeling like demons pulling you down and just constantly having to fight to exhaustion to stay on the ledge. Like, that is this feeling of the film, even though our protagonist is, like, they're good people. It's very different than The Taxi Driver, where it's like the calling of being an angel or being a priest. Basically the clear metaphor here with the Catholic Scorsese Schrader lens. And yeah, the fact that I also work in healthcare, I'm just, you know, revealing more and more things about myself. Because these movies are just hitting me for very obvious reasons, okay? I absolutely adore this film. I just gave it a 10 straight away. You know, it's at the top of his game. So the fact that it's underrated, even besides how weird it is just like a crime. Please go check this one out. Please. And that's it. So to kind of explain, I've been moving, been upending my life, so I've had no time to continue working on my channel. Just as I start making some waves. Thank you all my new subscribers, thank you, I love you. I might just focus on like films I'm passionate about that I could say a lot about. Pyro Diva out.